Welcome back to the channel, and this week I have an announcement to make.
For the first time in over 3 months, I'm raising the stakes and finally playing in the 1-3 match stack game again.
Not that I kept track, but from September 26th to December 9th, I didn't play one single hand of poker because it was the end of rice season and I was working every day of the week. Immediately after the rice harvest ended, my second kid was born, so I took some more time away from poker to prioritize family. But once things got settled in, I finally had the chance to play poker again in the middle of December. I didn't want to risk thousands of dollars right off the bat, so I figured I'd play 1-2 for a bit to catch my bearings and get a feel for my game again. So that's what I did, and since that day I played 8 1-2 sessions, cashed in 5 of them, and profited just under $600 for an hourly win rate of $20.90, which I'm pretty happy with. I mentioned in my previous log that for the entire year I'm going to play the exact same amount of hours of 1-2 as I do 1-3 and try to average at least $25 per hour at the end of 2025. Each week I'll alternate between the two stakes and track the results along the way to keep you guys updated. So now that we have a few hours of 1-2 under our belt and got back in the swing of things, it's time to cut the bullshit and jump into the 1-3 match stack game for one main reason.
I'm no punk bitch!
I ain't no punk bitch neither.
I'm no punk bitch!
We're back at the nicest card room in Northern California, which is none other than Stone's Gambling Hall. But before we dive into this week's poker sessions, I gotta announce that every Monday I host an online meetup game on the Club GG app and give away $100 to the highest stack. If you want in, or you're looking for a place to play low stakes online poker, click the Club GG link in the description. We buy into the 1-3 match stack game for $500, which is the max to start the game, but as soon as the first hand is complete, you can match the highest stack. I'm happy to report that bomb pots are officially back in the vlog, and every dealer change we throw in $15 pre-flop, then go straight to a flop. In the first hand of the day, I got dealt Queen 8 offsuit in a bomb pot, but we missed completely. But luckily for us, just a few hands later, we get involved in the action. Early position opens to $10, next stack calls, and I'm in the hijack and look down at pocket 10s. Never just calling in this spot, so I put in the 3-bet to $45, and surprisingly both the original raiser and field caller put in the chips. We're going 3 ways in position to an amazing flop of 4-4-3 with 2 spades giving us the overpair. They both checked to me, and with $140 in the pot, I like a half pot bet in this spot to get value from smaller pairs and charge all their flush draws. We just get one caller from a player in middle position, and the pot's now doubled to $280. Going heads up to a turn, and the dealer throws out the 5 of hearts, which is a pretty juicy card. 6-5 now has a pair to go along with the straight draw, and a lot of flush draws could have picked up equity. Our opponent checks again. Since he only has around $200 left in his stack, there's only one move, which is all in, and our opponent snap calls. I turn over my hand like I always do when I'm all in, and we go to a river, which comes out the Jack of Diamonds. Our opponent says the 2 best words in poker, which is, "You're good." So right off the bat, we scoop in a pretty sizable pot, and hopefully it's a sign of how this session turns out. After winning that hand, I decided our stack would look a lot cooler with some green in it, so I color up $500 worth of red chips, then throw the stack of green chips to the front, which will always feel good. For this next hand, the $6 straddle is on, and under the gun opens the action to $16. Next stack calls the $16, and I'm in the hijack and look down at the ladies, pocket queens. $16 ain't enough, so I put in the 3-bet to $60, and once again I get 2 callers in a 3-bet pot in position, which I love to see. With $180 in the middle, the flop comes out 10-8 deuce with 2 hearts, once again giving us the overpair. Under the gun has about $230 left in his stack, and the other player only has around $130, so I think about what sizing to use. I could bet small, but then a scare card can come on the turn and I could lose a lot of action, or I can jam and get value from all the straight and flush draws out there. I go with the latter and go all in. Under the gun tanks for about a minute, but ends up putting in the fold, and player next stack snap folds. After taking 3 months off from playing 1-3, we're able to scoop in 2 sizable pots, and we're already up over $500 on the day, so I just have one thing to say.
I think I got my swagger back. Oh, oh, oh.
Unfortunately for us, the next hour was a little rough. We picked up 7-6 of spades in a 3-way 3-bet pot, but somehow managed to miss both our straight and flush draw, costing us around $200. And we couldn't connect with 9-7 offsuit in our second bomb pot of the day, so our chip stack took a little hit. The good news is the action is great in this game, and I feel super comfortable pushing my limits and playing bigger again. For this hand, the $6 straddle is on, and a player in early position puts in the call. I'm in the hijack and look down at ace-king offsuit, so it's time to put in the raise. I raised to $25, and only the limper calls, so we're going heads up to a flop of ace-6-4 with 2 spades, giving us top pair, top kicker. He starts off with a check, and I start off with a $30 bet to get value from a worse ace-x hand and charge all the straight and flush draws. Our opponent starts stacking up chips and decides to put in the good old check raise to $75. Maybe he has a hand like ace-10 or ace-jack trying to find out where he's at, or he outflopped me with a set or 2 pair. Since I have the king of spades in my hand, I'm not too worried about getting protection from a flush draw, so I put in the smooth call. Pot's now up to $200, and the turn is very interesting in the 9 of spades. Our opponent now slows down and checks, and now I have a decision. Either bet or check. Checking is a decent option in case I'm beat by a set or 2 pair, but since I have position, I think betting and checking back blank rivers is the best line of action. So that's what I do and throw out a bet of $80. He quickly calls, and now the pot's ballooned to $360. The river comes out the beautiful deuce of spades, but now putting 4 spades out there and giving us the nut flush. He checks again, and now the only decision we have is how much we're gonna bet. Just a few hands prior in the day, our opponent called a pot-sized bet with 4 to a flush, just holding an 8 in his hand, so that comes into play on my bet sizing. I settle on a bet of $225, hoping he has a hand like ace-queen or ace-jack with a spade in it, and he'll put in the chips. But after tanking for over a minute, he turns over the ace of clubs and tosses his hand in the muck, saying that he had 2 pair, which honestly makes a lot of sense. I think a bet around $100 probably would have got called, but I got greedy and went for gold, which I'm fine with since all last year I was betting way too small.
Thank you.
A few orbits go by and we got another dealer change, which means another bomb pot. 8 people decided to join the party, so with 115 in the middle, we got dealt 5-4 hearts, which is a pretty decent hand in a bomb pot. Flop came out ace-jack-7 rainbow and got checked around. Turn was a 4 of spades, giving us bottom pair, and luckily it got checked around again because the river was the 5 of clubs, giving us runner 2 pair. Since I didn't think anyone had much, I decided to throw out a small bet of $40, hoping someone checked a weak ace the entire way, but everyone folds and we scoop in our first bomb pot of the year. Besides a couple little hiccups, the session has gone pretty smooth so far. Next hand up, middle position opens the action to $20, which is a pretty big open with no straddle. Folds all the way to me on the button, and for the second time today, I look down at the ladies, pocket queens, and put in the 3-bet to $70. Folds all the way back to our opponent in middle position, who now puts in the 4-bet and makes it $220 to go. I don't know about you guys, but every 4-bet I've ever seen playing 1-3 has almost always been queens, kings, or aces. On occasion, I'll see someone 4-bet with ace-king, but usually people like flatting the 3-bet and seeing a flop. So given all that info, I don't hesitate at all before snap folding. I most likely only had 2 outs, and in this spot, there's really no point in flatting the 4-bet since I'm not deep enough to set mine, so in the end, it's just an easy fold. After under the gun opens the action to $15, I'm in the hijack and get downgraded 1 pair when I look down at the jackasses, pocket jacks. I settle on a 3-bet to $45 in position, and surprisingly the player to my left puts in the cold call. Cold calls are usually pocket pairs, suited aces, or Broadway cards and not much else. Original Razor also calls, so we're going 3 ways to a flop with 135 in the middle and get a horrible flop of ace-queen 3 giving us 3rd pair. Action gets checked through, and the turn is a blank in the deuce of spades, but after under the gun throws out a bet, I just gladly throw the jackasses in the muck. Next hand up, action gets folded to me, and I look down at the best hand ever created and pocket aces. I open the action to $20 over a $6 straddle and get called from the player to my left and the small blind. going 3 ways to a pretty decent flop of Jack 9-9 Rainbow giving us the overpair. With $60 in the middle and no flush draws available, I decided to throw out a half pot bet of $30 targeting Jacks, Queen 10, and smaller non-believing pairs. Next stack calls, and small blind gets out of the way, so the pot's now doubled to 120 and the turn peels off the deuce of clubs, putting 2 clubs on the board. It's possible our opponent picked up additional equity with a hand like King 10 or Queen 10 of clubs, so I decided to size up and bet $95. I like this sizing because I'm not giving draws the right price to continue, but I still think they'll put in the call, and I also think a jack is never folding for this price. Our opponent grabs a stack of red, adding up to $95, but surprisingly slides in some more chips and raises to $195. Turn raises are so underbluffed in low stakes, so I'm honestly hating this spot. With this play, I think my opponent is repping a 9 trying to get value, or he has a hand like Ace-Jack or King-Jack of clubs that wants to raise with a lot of equity and probably check back most rivers. Since I only have to call $100 more, I decide to put in the call and see what he does on the river. River is probably the worst card in the deck, and the Jack of Hearts now pairing the board and giving any Jack a full house. I check in flow, almost never expecting to be good with that horrible river card, and our opponent checks it back, then fast rolls 10-9 offsuit for the full house. Next time you're at the casino, keep an eye out for what your opponent show up with on turn and river raises, and I guarantee you'll almost never see a bluff. After losing a ton of our stack with the alleged best hand ever created, I'm looking to push myself to play deeper, so I add on $500 and I'm now into the game for $1,000 total. Even though we were up over $500 early on in the session, our stack is sitting right below the even mark, so we still have a good chance to get back in the land of profit. There's one limp in early position, and LoJack decides to raise to $13. Folds to me in the small blind, and I look down at one of my favorite hands, which is King Queen of Hearts. Since I'm in the worst position possible and this hand has so much post-flop playability, I decided it's good enough for a 3-bet, so I raised to $40. Folds to the original raiser who puts in the call, so we're going heads up to a flop of King 10-6 with 2 diamonds, giving us top pair second best kicker. With $80 in the pot, I decided to throw out a bet of $45 to get value from worse kings and charge all his straight and flush draws. Quickly puts in the call, so the pot's now up to $170, and the turn peels off the deuce of diamonds, bringing in the front door flush. Wasn't the biggest fan of this card since our opponent plays a ton of suited hands pre-flop, so that means he has a lot of flushes in his range. Even though he could have a flush, I think checking wouldn't be the best option. There's still value to get from hands like King Jack, King 9, Ace 10 and Ace Queen with a diamond, and Queen Jack. So I throw in another value bet of $80, and now our opponent wastes no time before raising to $200. Like I said earlier, turn raises are super underbluffed at the low stakes, especially when a player who I haven't seen bluff all day tries to pull it off. So I think this is a flush 99% of the time, and I have an easy but frustrating fold. Unfortunately for us, that was our last interesting hand of day one because it was time to leave, so let's get to the outro.
The session started off amazing after being up over $500, but after losing with pocket aces and King Queen of Hearts, put the nail in the coffin for us. In for $1,000, and out for $817 for a $183 loss. Hopefully we could salvage a win to end the week for day 2.
The first hand of day 2 starts off with me throwing on the $6 straddle under the gun. Under the gun 1 opens the action to $20, and it gets folded all the way to me, and I look down at Jack 8 of Hearts. For only $14 more, it's time to defend my straddle. I throw in the chips, and the flop comes out King 6-3 with 2 hearts, giving us the flush draw. I check, and our opponent throws out a c-bet of $25. Only thing to do in this spot is call, since our opponent has the range advantage on this board. Pot's up to 90, and the turn peels off the 9 of diamonds. I check in flow, and surprisingly our opponent checks it back. I think if he had a king or better, he's betting every single turn card, so I'm putting him on a pair below a king or ace high. Keeping that in mind, we go to a river and it peels off the 10 of diamonds and we miss our draw completely. There's no chance I'm winning with jack high, so in order to win this pot, we need a bluff. Since we established earlier our opponent doesn't have a king, we need to bet a size to make it look like we have a hand like king jack or king queen to get him to fold all his one pair holdings. I settle on a bet of $65, and he flashes the camera pocket queens, and we scoop in our first pot of the day with the bluff. Next hand up, there's 2 limps in early position, and a player in middle position raises to $15. Folds to me in the small blind, and I look down at A7 of clubs. I usually play a 3-better fold strategy in the small blind, but since there were limpers in the hand already, I figured I could put in the call in hopes of stacking someone with a better flush. Big blind calls as well, and so did the limpers, so we're going 6 ways to a flop of Jack 3 deuce with 2 clubs giving us the nut flush draw. I start off with a check, and now the big blind leads out into the field for $40. All the players in early position, including the original raiser, get out of the way, and a player in middle position puts in the call. Action's back on me, and now I have a decision. Players who lead out into the field without checking to the pre-flop aggressor usually have a 1-pair holding trying to find out where they're at. Now that the player in middle position just flatted the $40, we could assume he doesn't have a set or 2-pair because he'd want to put in a value raise for protection. So the best holdings our opponent can have is a jack, or they could have draws that we have dominated. I could just call since we're getting an amazing price, but in 2025 I decided to stop being passive and push the aggression when I sense weakness while using my tight image to my advantage. So I put in the raise to $180, and without much thought, both of our opponents end up tossing their hands in the muck, and the big blind told me he folded a jack. Feels nice to read the situation correctly and win 2 decent pots with a bluff. I'm still stacking my chips from the A7 hand, and I see 1 limper in early position put in the call, and then a player in middle position raises to $15. Folds to me on the button, and I look down at ace-king offsuit. I put in the 3-bet to $40, and surprisingly the limper cold calls the 40, and the original raiser calls as well. Going 3 ways to a flop of ace-jack 4 with 2 clubs giving us top pair, top kicker. Checks to me, and I throw out a value bet of $55 targeting small flush draws, gut shots, and worse aces. Both opponents toss their hand in the muck. Just like yesterday, we're off to an amazing start, so hopefully we could keep it going this time. For this next hand, we just had a dealer change, so that means one thing and one thing only. Bomb pot time. 7 people decided to join the party and throw in $15 pre-flop, and I get dealt 9-5 offsuit. Going 7 ways to a flop with 100 in the middle, and the board runs out 9-8-5 with 2 clubs giving us top and bottom pair. Action gets checked to me, and I decide to throw out a value bet of $45 charging all the straight and flush draws. We only get 1 caller from middle position, so now the pot's up to $190, and the turn shouldn't change anything in the 3 of spades. Our opponent checks it over, and now it's time to size up. I debated betting around half pot, but figured if he had an overpair or a combo draw, I could bet big and still get action. So I settle on a bet of $140, and our opponent wastes no time before putting in the chips. Pots balloon to $470, and we're looking for a huge blank like the deuce of hearts, but that's not what comes out because the dealer throws out the 6 of clubs, bringing in the front door flush and completing some straights. Luckily, our opponent decides to start off with a check, and I gladly check it back. He says he missed, and I turn over the winner, scooping in this very sizable bomb pot. Man, did I miss these things. At this point in the session, we've reached our high point, and we're up over $400 hoping to keep things rolling. In this next hand, early position limps, hijack raises to 25, and I'm next to act in the cutoff and look down at the infamous ace-king offsuit. Since I have position, I decide to put in the 3-bet to $75, and surprisingly, a player in the small blind cold calls. Folds back to the original raiser who doesn't think 75 is enough, and now 4 bets to $325. Like I said earlier in the vlog, 4 bets are almost always queens, kings, or aces, and occasionally ace-king. Against that range, my hand isn't doing too well, so I gladly toss this trash in the muck, and surprisingly, the small blind calls once again. I keep the camera rolling to see what goes down, and with 725 in the middle, the flop came out 10 deuce deuce rainbow. Small blind checked, and the hijack went all in for around 550 effective. Small blind ends up putting in the call, so the pot's sitting over $1,800. Turn came out the queen of diamonds, and the hijack rolled over pocket queens, which wasn't a surprise, but the small blind turned over queen 10 of hearts and was drawing dead. Just wanted to show this hand because I wanted to prove my 4-bet theory, and also wanted to show you guys how action-packed this 1-3 game is here at Stone's Gambling Hall. Next hand up, I look down at pocket 8s under the gun and open them to $21 over a $6 straddle. Just the button puts in the call, so we're going heads up to a flop of 9-8-5 rainbow, giving us middle set. Usually I bet all my value hands on this flop, but I thought this board would favor our opponent more, so if he bet, I could go for the check raise. So I check, but unfortunately he checks it back. Turn isn't great, and the 6 of spades giving any 7 a straight and putting 2 spades on the board. I decide I can't let our opponent see another free card, so I throw out a value bet of $35, and now he does something I wasn't expecting and puts in the raise to $125. Since he didn't bet on the flop, I think we could take all his top pair and overpairs out of the picture, so with this raise, he's repping the straight, or possibly 2 pair with a hand like 6-5. Never folding for this price, so I put in the chips, and now the pot's up to $290. River peels off a massive blank in the deuce of clubs, and I think the only move is to check and see what our opponent does. He starts stacking up chips and eventually throws out a pretty big bet of $230, which looks super value heavy. With this sizing, I think we could take out all the 2-pair combos in his range because I figured he'd bet smaller with those. So with this bet, he's saying he has a 7 or a bluff. This specific player plays a wide range of suited hands, so he could have a ton of 7s in his range like 7-6, 9-7, 8-7, 10-7, or Ace-7 for the straight. While I was tanking, I tried to think of all the bluffs in his range, but I had a hard time thinking of some because if he had a hand like Jack-10, I figured he would start a semi-bluff on the flop with that. So even though I have middle set, I decided to toss my hand in the muck, and our opponent decided to show his cards and reveals King-Queen of spades for just king-high. He decided to turn his missed backdoor flush draw into a bluff and got us to fold the best hand. I honestly liked his play because that board crushes his calling range and puts a lot of my hands in a tough spot. Looking back, I think calling is fine because it's hard to make a set, but I just couldn't think of his bluffs in real time. Just gotta take note of it and move on. Next hand up, the same player opens at $20 in the cutoff, and I'm in the big blind and look down at the best hand ever created in pocket aces. Since I'm out of position and we're playing pretty deep, I decide to size up and put in the 3-bet to $90. He quickly calls, so there's $180 in the pot, and the flop looks pretty good in Jack 4-3 rainbow, giving us the overpair. I want to keep all his 1-pair holdings in, so I size down to just $80, but he quickly folds, and we get some money back from him after he pulled off that solid bluff. At this point in the day, we're up around $270, even after getting bluffed, so I'm feeling pretty good about the session. For this next hand, the same opponent who we've been battling with opens the action at $20 in middle position, and I'm on the button and look down at ace-queen offsuit and decide to put in the 3-bet to $60. He quickly calls, so we're going heads up to a flop with $120 in the middle of ace-10-8 rainbow, giving us top pair solid kicker. He checks in flow, and I start off with a value bet of $45, which is the sizing I'd use with my entire range on this board. He calls once again, so now the pot's up to $210, and the turn peels off the 3 of hearts, putting 2 hearts on the board. He checks it over, and I decided I'm going for another value bet targeting all his worst aces and straight draws. Since I have the ace of hearts in my hand, I didn't want to go too big since I didn't need protection from ace-x of hearts since it's impossible for him to have, so I throw out a half-pot bet of 105 trying to keep all his draws and weaker pairs in there. He calls once again, so pot's now doubled to 420, and the river is one of the worst cards in the deck and the jack of spades. The hands that we were ahead of that now have us beat are ace-jack, jack-10, king-queen, queen-9, and 9-7. And to make matters worse, our opponent doesn't check it over, but instead bombs it for $375, sending me in the tank. When you're in a tough spot, you have to think of all the value hands your opponent could have, which we just went over, as well as all the bluffs. There weren't any front door flush draws available, and he's not calling with complete air on the flop, so while I'm tanking, I was thinking the only bluffs he could have would be a hand like queen-jack of hearts, king-jack, or jack-9. All those holdings would have to turn a pair into a bluff. We now know this opponent is capable of bluffing in the spot, but after going over all the different combinations in my head, I felt like there were a ton more value hands than bluffs, so I decided to toss my hand in the muck. I was feeling pretty good about the decision until our opponent turns over king-jack offsuit for second pair and once again completely owning our soul.
Damn!
Hats off to him for having the guts to pull off those 2 bluffs, and I'm excited to get back on the felt and battle it out in the future. We played for a bit longer after that hand, but nothing significant really happened, so let's get to the outro.
Well, that session flat out sucked. We had a great start to the day, but got put in some really nasty spots that we got bluffed in both times. But sometimes all you could do is learn from it and tip your cap. In for 500 and out for 504 for a whopping $4 win. Not ideal, but I'll take it every time over a loss.
As for this week in poker, we only played 6 hours and 10 minutes of 1-3 because the game gets started a little later in the day. We ended up losing a total of $179 And it could have been a big week if some of our big hands held up, and we made at least one hero call, but all you could do is live and learn. This is where our stats sit for the year 2025, and we're up $135 total for a win rate just under $10 an hour. Excited to get back on the felt next week and battle it out in the 1-2 streets. Thanks for watching, and as always, I hope you guys run good at the tables, and I'd appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button to help me reach my goal of 10,000 subscribers.